Hello, everyone. This is Shannan Vance Ocampo. My pronouns are she and her, and I am the General Presbyter for the Presbytery of Southern New England. And this is connecting our conversations, our podcast space for conversations that push the edges of our faith and help us to deepen discipleship. The Presbytery of Southern New England is a regional governing body in the Presbyterian Church, U.S.A. And I think today is going to be a bunch of fun as a podcast. Today we're welcoming the Reverend Shelley Donaldson, who's the associate pastor at First Presbyterian in Stamford, Connecticut. That church is also known as the Fish Church. Most people know it by that name. And John Bitner, a member of the church, who is the head beekeeper at the church. So you heard that right. We're going to talk today about honeybees and ministry on the podcast today. And I was sharing with Shelley and John before we got started that there's a few references to bees in the Bible. And the most famous one is in Judges 14. Judges is always a kind of interesting book in the Bible to read from. But I just want to read just a little bit at the beginning of Judges 14, sort of one of those, as Shelley was saying before we got on, one of those weird stories in the Bible, right? There's some weird things in there. So this is about Samson's marriage. And, like anything, there's a little bit of misogyny in this story. So I just want to warn everybody of that before we get started. But there is a piece in here about bees. Once Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah, he saw a Philistine woman. Then he came up and told his father and mother, I saw a Philistine woman at Timnah. Please go get her for me as my wife. But his father and mother said to him, is there not a woman among your kin or among all of our people that you must go take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? But Samson said to his father, go get her for me because she pleases me. His father and mother did not know that this was from the Lord, for he was seeking a pretext to act against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines had dominion over Israel. Then Samson went down with his mother and father to Timnah, and when he came to the vineyards of Timnah, suddenly a young lion roared at him. The Spirit of the Lord rushed on Samson, and he tore the lion apart barehanded, as one might tear apart a kid. But he did not tell his mother and father what he had done to the lion. Then he went down and talked to the woman, and she pleased Samson. After a while, he returned to marry her and turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and there was a swarm of bees in the body of the lion and honey. He scraped it out into his hands and went on, eating as he went. And he came to his father and mother and gave them some of the honey, and they ate it. But he did not tell them that he had taken the honey from the carcass of the lion. That's a weird story about bees in the Bible. I hope we're not doing that I don't think we're doing that at the Stamford Church to the bees.
I mean, you've given us some new ideas.
I haven't seen a lion in Stamford before, so maybe that's not going to happen there. The other thing I thought was sort of interesting, I did a little bit of research ahead of this podcast, using Google, of course, my favorite research tool. So there's a couple really cool patron saints, and of course the word Deborah, the prophet Deborah in the Bible, that word in Hebrew means bee. And that's very common that women's names in Hebrew actually mean animals in the Bible. That's kind of common throughout the Hebrew scriptures, which is interesting. In Genesis, the word Eve means actually in Aramaic, kava, which is an old Aramaic word for snake. So even Eve has that piece in Genesis. But on patron saints, we've got Saint Ambrose of Milan, who's a 4th century Roman bishop, and he is considered to be the most popular candidate for patron saint of bees and beekeepers. When he was a child, he was swarmed by bees, and they did not sting him, but they left, the history says, a drop of honey on his face. And this signaled that he would be a great speaker, and he came to be known as the honey-tongued doctor due to his eloquent preaching. And it's very common that medallions of St. Ambrose are attached on the side of beehives. And the Latin phrase for honey is ambrosia, like Saint Ambrose, and that means food of the gods. That's interesting. And in Ireland, uh, Saint Gognet, I think that's how you say it, also known as Saint Abigail or Saint Deborah, is the patron saint of bees and beekeeping. Um, this is a story they think is a little embellished. It says that her bees turned into soldiers to fend off invaders trying to take the cows in her community. Um, and this saint was also a beekeeper in their time. And Celtic lore says that when the soul leaves the body, it leaves the body as a bee or a butterfly because bees are held in high esteem. And Saint Bernard of Clairvaux is also another saint associated with bees. He was, his feast day is August 20th, which happens to be National Bee Day in the United States. So just some interesting things sort of in the Bible and in the history of the Christian church about bees. I thought we'd start out with a little bit of that trivia as we get going to talk about the bees. So let's get started, Shelley and John, with both of you. I'd love to get you to introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about who you are for our podcast listeners, and then we'll get going with the rest of the podcast. So whoever would like to go first.
Go ahead, Shelley.
Oh, John, come on. Um, I'm Shelley Donaldson. Like Shannan said, I'm the associate pastor at First Pres in Stamford. And I wanted to keep bees. I'll be totally honest and forthright. I've always loved the idea of beekeeping. And it was something that my wife and I had talked about when we first moved here. And there was a little piece of land in front of our fellowship hall down by one of our parking lots that is fenced off and has a lock on it. It used to be a garden, and it's sort of like a lot of ministry projects, they have their time. And that garden, while it was great when it lasted, it sort of, it ran its life cycle, and we were trying to decide what to do with the piece of land right there, and ended up letting it fallow for a year, let the soil regenerate. And then when somebody started asking the question, what are we going to do with that? And nobody really knew. And I said, I would suggest we try beekeeping because honestly, it sounded fun. It was something I was interested in. And I found that we had plenty of people in church who were super interested in it. And we just so happened that we had our resident beekeeper, John Bitner, here. So John, I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm John Bitner. I've probably been a member of First Pres for close to 30 years now. Been a deacon, been an elder. And I should say I'm by no means an expert. I've only been keeping bees probably 3 years now. And, last year when Shelley found out that I had bees and convinced me to put a hive in that old garden, and the hive did well. And so this year we've got a lot of interest, and we presently have 5 hives in that garden.
Mm-hmm.
So
what's really nice is that so that first hive John mentioned, it did well. Unfortunately, it did die, as beehives can do. And what we decided to do is our church gives out grants twice a year. And there's 2 categories. One's a community category, and they fit underneath the Matthew 25 initiative of the Peace U.S.A. And so if it's an internal grant within the church, it has to do with either, combating systemic racism, that building that community vitality, and oh gosh, what's the other one?
Systemic poverty.
Yes, systemic poverty. And so what we did for the community ones as well is there's in the same vein, but instead of the congregational vitality, it's community vitality. So when John and I were talking about this after last year's hive, we thought, well, let's apply for a grant and see if they'll give us any money. And so we got an internal grant, and that paid for the hives. And then there were several of us that decided we wanted to, you know, buy the bee boxes and take care of them. So the hives were paid for by the church grants.
The bees.
The bees, yes, the bees.
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. And I love tying it to Matthew 25, of course, because you know, you can build that congregational community vitality in a lot of different ways. But there's also connectional areas of Matthew 25, one of which is about addressing the climate crisis. And of course, bees are very, very important to addressing issues in our larger ecology around our communities. So they're just a key part of the food chain. Without bees, the food chain would really collapse in on itself. Means we wouldn't have pollination, which is so important for the creation of all sorts of foodstuffs. So I'm really excited that you connected the bees to the Matthew 25 work of the church. That's really great. So let's just sort of like take it step by step. So because there's some people I'm sure on the podcast who've never kept bees or been to an apiary where bees are being kept. So John, if you just want to walk us through kind of from the get going, kind of from the ground up to having bees in a space successfully. So I'll let you just sort of walk us through a few of the steps if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. You know, the most important thing is to educate yourself. And really, before you jump into becoming a beekeeper or having a beehive, you really need to lay the groundwork for yourself. And through, there's a lot of instructional videos on YouTube, and there's a lot of books. I tried to spread around some books so that you're not going in blind and suddenly you don't know what you're doing. After you've sort of educated yourself, you can buy your boxes and your protective equipment, which you can see, which is a jacket with a veil over your face and gloves so the bees can't get at you. And there's two ways you can buy bees. You can buy a box of bees, which is approximately 10,000 bees, and put those into your box, or you can buy what they call a nucleus. And that is a established mini hive that has a queen and worker bees and food for the bees and comb already in it. And that gives the bees a head start. And you take those frames that have the honeycomb on them and put them in your empty box. From there, you feed them for a while with a mixture of sugar water until there's enough pollen and food for them to feed themselves. From there, you can stop feeding them and let them bring in their own pollen and take over. And there is some maintenance to make sure they're building out their hive. And through the season, they should be probably tripling their numbers. And because they have to continuously produce new bees, because the bee only lasts for 42 days. So the queen, who lays 1,000 to 2,000 eggs a day, that's her job to replace the probably a couple hundred bees that die a day. So the bees are throughout the season will go and store honey, which is essentially their food to get them through the winter, which incidentally, they don't make it through the winter half the time, which is not unusual. And if you're a beekeeper, you can't get upset if they don't make it through the winter. So at the end of the season, you need to leave enough honey for them to feed themselves over the winter. And if there is an excess, you can take that. Or in the case with my hives, I have not had a hive make it through the winter yet. So and they'll usually die from starvation because they move around inside the hive, but don't move enough to get to all the food they've saved. So if the hive does die off, well, that honey is all yours to collect.
It's great, John. And so, of course, somebody's going to wonder, so what happens in the winter to the bees? What happens to them in the winter?
Well, in the late fall, they kick out all the drones, which are males,
Hmm.
to conserve on the food. They do breed a hardier strain of bees to make it through the winter, and they reduce their numbers. They do ball up around the queen to keep her warm, and they will, as I said, they will move around somewhat in the hive to get the food, to get the honey that they've stored. Sometimes they'll starve, sometimes disease will get to them, and sometimes they'll make it through the winter.
It's great. And so I just want to, you started saying what each hive has about 10,000 bees in it, right?
To start with, yes.
So how many bees, how many hives are there at the church right now?
There are 5 hives right now.
So there's about 50,000 bees hanging out on the side of the church.
Well, there better be more by now.
Yeah,
We've
definitely
all
got to be
expanded,
more.
yeah, we've all expanded up to the second box because the first boxes were filled.
Uh-huh.
Once the first box gets 80% filled, you put another box on, and
Right.
we're all have 2 boxes on now. So
Oh,
there
okay. So maybe about double-ish of
maybe
that.
about double. Yeah, could be
Yeah.
even.
Yeah. And when
Yeah,
I
we
was there at the church a few Sundays ago, I went to visit the bees, of course. I was excited to see them. And they were having a blast because the flowers are coming out for spring right now. And they were definitely drunk on pollen when I was there a couple weeks ago. They were having a really good time. A couple of them were confused and on brightly colored things outside that were not flowers. But they were definitely having they were happy bees.
Mhm.
Yeah. Very happy bees. So, how many other folks in the church are participating in taking care of them?
There's 4 other families.
Okay.
Yeah, so John has a hive, obviously. He's brought one of his hives there. Um, Tara and I have a hive, and then there's 2 other couples and then a family that have got the bees. And it's it's been really fun. And the thing is that not everybody is able to keep their own hive. And so what's nice is that even for people who can't keep their own hive, they can still participate and come and check the bees and come with us when we go to do things. So it's not just those of us that are keeping hives. And the other nice thing is that, for instance, Tara and I are headed out for my study leave for the next 2 weeks. And so I have a whole group of people that'll be watching out for our hive while we're gone. And, we'll do the same for them when they're gone. And so it actually works out really well. It's a really nice form of fellowship
Hmm.
and sort of just this fun thing to do. But, ecologically, it's a good thing. Theologically, it's a good thing. It really does live into the creation care piece. And it's just interesting. Like it is interesting. And I think there's also, as John mentioned, the hive last year died during the winter. And so John harvested all the honey and we, gave it to church members and people who were visiting. And, we have a jar of it out at coffee hour so people can have with their tea in the mornings. And people really love it. Like they really think it's cool that, the bees from our church, made this honey that we're still using. So it really is sort of a talking piece. It's really fun. And we're hoping in the future, to soup it up a little bit, maybe decorate a little down there with some of our teenagers over the summer, put some, signs up of,
Hmm.
here's what you should know about bees. And we lovingly call them the fish bees at the church. So
Mm, it's really great. It's really great. Next, you need like a little webcam on one of them that's got like a live feed on your website,
we
like the
did
Panda Cam at the National Zoo, right?
we've talked, some of us have talked about that a few weeks ago. I forget who went down there. John, I don't know if you saw this picture or not, but we have a WhatsApp chat with some of us on the bees who work on the bees. And I forget who it was. Oh, it was Albertine and Tanner. And they went, and when they were down checking their bees, one of the other hives was like swarming on one of the fence posts while they were there. And so, they were taking photos and sending us all photos and everything. And then when they were done doing whatever they did, they watched them and they just all went right back to the hive. So it's really cool to actually see.
Yeah. Yeah.
And since we have 2 cameras off the side of the building down there, I thought perhaps we could open one of those up so we could watch the hives. I've tried to encourage people before we set up these hives to, if they live in apartments or don't have a property that they can put it on, hive there to set their hive up. Another great thing that I advertise, it's supposedly very good for people who have allergies, because local honey microdoses you to the things you're allergic to. And I know a few people who claim it works.
Yeah. Yeah, all sorts of curative properties of honey. So let's talk a little bit about we've been talking about the creation care and Matthew 25, but the ecology of bees. Why are bees so important to our natural landscapes and to the ecologies that are around us? You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, it's, as you mentioned before, it's all about pollination. And our pollinators, whether they be bees or insects or flies, they all do pollinating. And they are somewhat in trouble because of all the insecticides we use now, where people are constantly spraying their trees, their lawn, their flowers, and the bees are very susceptible to that. So that's one good reason to start beekeeping, is to help out the pollinators, because we'd be in a lot of trouble if we didn't have them.
I think in the city of Stamford, there is really this push. We have a lot of gardening enthusiasts down here that we actually have a few master gardeners at in our congregation. And there is a really big push in this part of the country, I think, to do more native plants. And so you'll see a lot of native plants in people's yards and along the roads and in like the sort of community area gardens. And there's some you can get like your house certified, your yard certified to be like on the butterfly trail, things like that. So for instance, whenever we add new plants to our yard, we try to make them ideally native plants, but also bee-friendly plants and butterfly-friendly plants, because I think John, I don't know if you mentioned this yet or not, but I think you said the one time the bees go up to like 3 miles away to get there to get pollen. And so, I'm probably only about a mile away from the church, give or take. So, I don't even know if the bees are stopping over near our place, but other people are keeping bees. I know Scott over at New Canaan keep bees over at the New Canaan church. He's got bees. And so I think it is, they're not just, bees aren't just going to one place to get the pollen. They're going all over. And so it's a little bit easier actually, I think, in Stamford, because people have that mindset of being a little ecologically friendly and making sure that we've got, foliage that's supposed to be in this area and that's thriving here.
And you all are also in a great location because you've got a number of apartment buildings, John, as you shared, around you. And those folks in those high rises around the church don't have much access to green space. You don't have a yard if you're in an apartment, and you have the opportunity to open up green space for your neighbors. And if they want to keep bees, you've got that huge front lawn. That could be like a huge community like garden. People could like get plots in it and stuff. But I'm always a proponent of like taking every church lawn, tearing it up and turning it into gardens, which makes, I know, some people horrified because it wouldn't make the front of the church as pretty perhaps as before. But I just look at it as like green space. So, but you've got all that. And I know people, whenever I'm at the church, I see people on your front lawn sitting and picnicking sometimes, or visiting with their dogs. And so your church space on the outside is definitely community space. People have definitely taken it
Mm-hmm.
to be community space, which I think is really great
Yeah,
as
that's
well.
pretty, yeah, and I think that is sort of a hallmark of the church, is that it is because of where it's situated and the way the landscaping works. There's
Mhm.
always people hanging out on the front lawn. During the summers when we do our concerts on the green, then we really encourage people to come out and hang out on the lawn. When it
Mhm.
snows during the wintertime, you'll see all these kids from the neighboring apartments out there sledding down the hill. So it's actually a really nice feature of the church, is the fact that we do have the amount of green space that we have and how it's available to the public.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's unusual for an urban church to have that kind of green space, right? So it's really fun. What were you going to say, John? I'm sorry.
I was going to say, in the coming year, if this is successful, we could easily double the amount of hives in that
Mm,
garden space
Mhm.
easily. So hopefully
yeah.
we can get more interest going.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's really fun. I think it's really fun. Say a little bit more about sort of your theology behind this. I know you talked a little bit at the beginning, Shelley, about the Matthew 25 work, but a little bit about theology of space and theology of outdoors in a church. How does that come up for all of you?
Well, I think so, like you mentioned, I know you're the kind of person, you see a piece of land and you're like, let's put a garden there. And I think some people might be horrified at that thought, but the nice thing is, so this piece of land was already there and fenced off, which was important for us to make sure that that the bees were safe, and that it wasn't, not just anybody could get to them.
Of course.
And so we already had the space there, and it felt a little silly to try to just tear the fence down and forget about it. We had it, why not use it? And because of the space that it's in, we have one of the apartment buildings that's right next to the church. We have a lot of folks who walk their dogs right by there, or walk their children, or just take a daily walk by there. And so there is an immediate sort of connection with the neighborhood, because people can see it. I mean, as soon as we were setting up, I think, the first box, John, we had people walking by and they were like, "What are you doing? What is that? Are those bees?" And so people were curious, and when they see us out there, they'll come up and say something to us. So it provides a community connection, which is really nice, and people are interested in it. Um, but I think it also fosters a sense within the church itself. The mix of those of us that are caring for the hives. You have John, who's got his hive, and then you have the Gibbs family there. So those are two beehives of church members that have been here a while and are established. And then Tara and I have bees. We've only been here about 6 years. So, but then the other two hives are two of our younger couples,
Mm,
and they're both pretty new to the church, but both really want to be invested in some way. And this is a fun thing that we can all do together. So it does foster that sense of community. Um, and again, it is also I think it's a simple reminder that even something as tiny as a bee is just as important as another part of creation, that they play the role too of that, that priesthood of all believers. Everybody's got a job. There's a place in the choir for everybody. And so part of our job is, to care for those things. And so bees are an easy way to sort of show that creation care practice, and to do it. It's pretty, it's low stakes. Unless you're allergic to bees, which is, then you should stay away. But it's a talking piece. It's a way to engage people. So if somebody doesn't know about the bees, maybe you're in coffee hour on a Sunday and you see this jar that says, fish bees on it, or fish bee honey, or whatever. And that's a talking point for people of like, oh, you provided this. And it's a way for kids to be interested. We have a lot of our youth who are really curious about it. And we have an after school program as well, our creative learning program. And they are hoping to sort of get in on doing some education around ecology and bees in nature. Our director is really into nature and the outdoors with the kids. And so So yeah, so it sort of hits a lot of different things. But again, a church is a place where you build community, and the bees are sort of one small way that we can do that. We can sort of build up that community vitality, not just within the church, but also outside of it, given where we're located and the amount of people that just simply pass through our property every day.
Yeah, thanks, Shelley. Yeah, I just love that you have them there. I think it's really wonderful, and it's a great way of doing outreach as well. As you said, your neighbors walk by with their dogs and might begin to think, hey, this is a church that I might want to be a part of. Maybe this is not what I think churches usually like. They're doing something unusual. And to begin to meet some of you while you're out there, to sort of break down some of those barriers
Mm-hmm.
around the community. So as we close up, I'd love to hear a couple fun stories about the bees, if you have any. I like the story about the swarming, and we could describe what a swarm is. I've shared with you, John, my parents have bees in North Carolina, and interestingly, my mom has that allergy where she goes into anaphylactic shock with the bees, but they still successfully keep them. My mom just doesn't get involved at all, and just stays away from that part of the yard. And they love having them. They of course have an electric fence around it because they have a lot of bears where they are, and so they have to protect the bees from the bears and make sure of that. But it's been fascinating for me watching what the bees are capable of and what they can do over the years at my parents' house. Um, so talk a little bit more about some, fun stuff they've done so far and things they brought up for all of you.
Hmm.
I feel like our bees have been pretty low key so far.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah,
not a lot of drama
they,
yet.
they have.
No, not much drama.
It's good they only swarmed so a swarm, right, is when the whole hive decides to en masse go somewhere and hang out for a while. And um I know my parents, they live right next to a golf course, and they got a call from the pro shop or something at the golf course one day and said, we've been calling around to some of the neighbors. We think you're the ones who have bees. Is that you? And my parents said, oh yeah, that's us. And so their bees had swarmed down the golf course, and they were on this branch of a tree, and they had gotten it so heavy it was hanging over one of the either spots where you hit the ball, or like the tee, or over one of the I know this is terrible, I'm not using any of the words for golf course. One of the holes in the ground where the golf balls goes in. And it was scaring the golfers, right? And so they went over, and they actually took a hive in the back of a golf cart and drove it under where the branch was, and then they clipped the branch, and the swarm just kind of went right into the hive, and then they booked it off the golf course and put the bees back where they were supposed to be. But they had kind of they'd created an incident on the golf course. So
There's
I'm glad your
there's
bees haven't done anything so dramatic yet.
yeah, there's several reasons why they swarm, and one
Yeah.
of them can be overcrowding.
Hmm.
If they're have a lot of mites which do attack the bees, half of them will leave. They'll take the
Okay.
present queen, of which there's only one allowed in a hive. They'll take her and half of the worker bees, and they'll swarm. They'll fly away and look for some other place to set up a hive.
Mm.
Well, that leaves the other half of the bees in your hive without a queen. And you can either go and buy a queen and reintroduce her, or wait and see if they'll produce another queen.
Mm.
It's usually overcrowding that causes them to swarm,
Ah.
and it's this time of year.
Ah, okay. And it's
Mm.
also like a kidnapping situation, right? They steal the queen
Yeah, the
and
queen
take
goes
her
away.
somewhere.
Yep.
Yeah, I think one of the first days, what's it called? It's called bearding, when they all kind of hang out of the front.
That's to cool them off. If it gets too hot in the hive, they'll
Mhm.
all hang out outside and cool the hive down.
Yeah, there was one day towards the beginning, we had a really warm day here. And so some of the group were down checking their hives, and I got a call from one of them, I think from Claire, who said, "Oh my gosh, you have to see this. She's like, your hive is doing the bearding thing." And then some of their hives started doing it too. So it was like, oh, I guess they're all getting a little hot today. But yeah, it was funny when we went to feed them this morning. We just wanted to check on them, give them a little extra food while we were gone, just to, help them out. And so we lifted the top off, lifted the top box. There were some bees working on some new honeycomb on that top box. And when we took the top box off, the bottom box where most of the bees were definitely like, "Oh, not today, Satan." And as
Smoke,
soon,
smoke, smoke.
I know. Well, we decided not to smoke them this morning because we just thought, this is a quick trip. We
Sure.
didn't have time. And it was early in the morning, so they weren't really super active yet. It was still a little chilly. So we were like, well, let's chance it. I wear a full bee suit after getting stung 3 times in 2 days. So I have a full body bee suit now. So I look like an astronaut walking in there. And we lifted the top box off, and the bees were definitely like, this is not what we had on our agenda today. And as soon as I opened the jar of the sugar water and started pouring it in, it was sort of like, oh, okay, this is fine. Like they all stopped buzzing around us and they all just like ran back to the hive.
Yeah.
So, so they're thirsty little suckers, but
You're the
yes.
lady with the food.
Right. They were like, oh, you bring food. Great. This is good. Thank you. So we have kept our feeder in there just because we want to make sure, it's been a little chilly and we wanted to make sure that they've, I'd rather them have a little extra food than not. But I think they're doing pretty good. They're starting to expand. They're starting to grow. It's definitely bigger than when we first got them. But it's really been fun to learn about, to be honest. And I'll be totally candid. As a pastor, I do try to really encourage people to, if you have an idea, run with it, because those ministries should come from the people. But I'll be totally honest in saying this is something I really wanted to do. And I thought, well, this is low stakes. I could do this, right? If people will buy into it, I could do it. So it's actually worked out quite well. And we're really hopeful, in the future to get more people who will want to do hives, and maybe even folks who are not church members who do live in those apartments next door. Because when we had the garden, we had several people from the apartments come over and help us with it on a regular basis. So hopefully it'll be something where people can find themselves, taking part in it, even if they're not, members of the church community.
That's great. Well, thank you both so much for all of your stories and information about the fish bees, as you all call them. We'll start calling them that too. I thought I'd close with 2 prayers for bees and beekeeping. I don't know if have you all prayed with the bees? Have you had a prayer service with the bees yet, or done a blessing of the bees?
We haven't, not yet, but hopefully in the future. We've got Pentecost Sunday coming up, which we tend to have a few more people at because we have a big picnic. So hopefully that'll be a time when we can do that.
The blessing of the bees. So there's a prayer for beekeepers. I think this is beautiful. It says, "Dear God, watch over me as I tend to my bees. Guide my hands to be smooth and my hives to be peaceful. Give me joy as I go through my day. Grant me wisdom to make good choices and be a good steward of animals. Let me always remember the privilege I have to tend to your creation." Thought that was a beautiful prayer. And this is a prayer for bees. Bless the bees. Bless them with abundant, healthy food and nesting sites. Bless them with strong, healthy offspring. Bless future generations of bees, and may their populations be expanded and protected. Thank you for bees, and may they forever be blessed. So thank you so much, John and Shelley, for sharing with us about bees and beekeeping at First Presbyterian Stamford, the fish bees. We're so grateful for both of you and for this really fun ministry in the life of the larger presbytery. And keep us posted as you go through the summer with the bees. We want to hear more about how they're doing, and we'll make sure to let people know if they want to pick up some of the honey, how to get in touch with you about that as well. So thanks for being part of connecting our conversations.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.